The ship drops anchor in the port of Piraeus at an amber-colored dawn. In the distance, atop a hill of white rock, a silhouette emerges that no European traveler of the early 19th century can describe without their pen trembling. The Acropolis of Athens, with the Parthenon still half intact, still bearing smoke marks from the Venetian explosion of 1687, still surrounded by Ottoman houses, minarets, and bazaars squeezed between the ancient columns, as if the present and the past were in constant negotiation. We are in the early years of the 1800s. Greece is still Ottoman territory. Lord Byron has yet to arrive. Edward Dodwell is already roaming the countryside with his sketchbook. And a wave of European travelers, English, French, German, the Italian, is crossing the Mediterranean with the same mix of reverence and curiosity. They want to see the places where Western civilization was born. And what they find is a world where ancient history and Ottoman domination coexist in a fascinating, unsettling, and beautiful tension. This video is a trip back in time, across mainland Greece and the island of Crete in the early years of the 19th century, before independence, before archaeologists, before tourism, through the eyes of the travelers who were there and left records behind. Subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and leave a like. This journey is going to surprise you. Any European traveler who set foot in Athens in the early 19th century experienced an immediate shock, but not the shock they expected. Oh, the city they found was not the metropolis of antiquity that Pericles had built. It was a small Ottoman town of around 10,000 inhabitants, with narrow dirt streets, low houses made of stone and clay, mosques, public fountains, and a lively bazaar that had spread literally over the ruins of the Roman agora. The Piazzara Porta, the bazaar gate, stood exactly where the gate of Athena Archegetus had once been, built 2,000 years earlier. But above all of it, the Acropolis loomed. Edward Dodwell, the Irish archaeologist and traveler who journeyed through Greece between 1801 and 1806 and left one of the most detailed accounts of the era, described Athens as a bewildering mixture of grandeur and decay. The Parthenon was still standing, but damaged by the 1687 explosion that had blown out its roof and inner walls when the Venetians struck the gunpowder storage the Ottomans had installed inside. The Erechtheion functioned as the governor's harem. The Propylaea served as the headquarters of the Turkish garrison. And in the courtyard of the Acropolis, between the millennia-old columns, there were houses, small brick and stone structures where families lived, cooked, and hung clothes to dry between the marble shafts. The Acropolis of the early 19th century was simultaneously the highest point of Western history and a second-rate residential neighborhood. Lord Elgin had been there between 1801 and 1802, a few years before later travelers, and had removed the Parthenon sculptures with authorization from the Sultanate. When what subsequent travelers encountered were the scars where the friezes had been torn away, pale gaps in the darkened marble that looked like fresh wounds, and yet, even damaged, even occupied, even divided between the distant past and the Ottoman present. Athens stirred in the European traveler an emotion no other city could replicate. It was physical contact with the place where democracy, philosophy, and Western theater had been invented. And that contact happened inside a bazaar, amid the smell of spices and the noise of bargaining, in a mix of Greek and Turkish. Most Grand Tour travelers stayed in coastal cities or major archaeological sites, Athens, Corinth, Mycenae. Few ventured into the mountainous interior. Those who did found a Greece completely different from what they expected. Mainland Greece in the early years of the 19th century was a world of rural communities living with considerable autonomy from Ottoman power. The mountains, Pindus, Tagetus, the hills of Boeotia, were territories where the Sultan's authority arrived only intermittently, often reduced to a tax collector who showed up once a year and quickly left. Within this space of relative autonomy existed a culture that blended Byzantine traditions, medieval Greek customs, and a new national consciousness that was beginning to ferment. Mountain villages had their own leaders, their own Orthodox priests who served as civil authorities as well as religious ones, and a collective memory of resistance expressed in the songs of the Clefts. The bandit warriors who lived in the highlands and whom popular tradition turned into heroes. The European traveler who dared to push into the interior encountered genuine and intense hospitality in the villages. The Greek tradition of xenia, hospitality toward foreigners, was still strongly alive. You would arrive at a village, knock on any door, and be immediately welcomed with food, wine, and a place to sleep. The exchange was information. Foreign travelers were valuable sources of news about the outside world, especially about revolutionary France and the Napoleonic Wars that were reshaping Europe. Dodwell described villages where he met shepherds with rifles over their shoulders who spoke about ancient Greek philosophy with the same ease as they discussed the price of a herd. Hellenic identity, the awareness of being descended from the Greeks of antiquity, was actively cultivated, especially through the Orthodox Church, which had preserved Greek as a liturgical language through centuries of Ottoman domination. Were you surprised by what Athens was like in the early 1800s? Comment here. Would you be down to do this grand tour with travelers of that era? Yes or no? I want to read your answers. Crossing the Aegean Sea toward Crete in the early years of the 19th century meant entering a territory where the tension between Greeks and Ottomans had taken on a specific character, rooted in centuries of revolt and repression. Crete had fallen under Ottoman rule in 1669, after a war that lasted more than 20 years against Venice. And ever since, the island had been the stage for intermittent uprisings. The most famous one before the Great Revolution of 1821 was that of Daskaloggianus. In 1770, a Cretan merchant who organized an insurrection based on Russian promises of support that never came, was captured and flayed alive by the Ottomans, and became a legend among the Cretans. When European travelers arrived in Heraklion, then called Chandax or Candia, they found a city with a clear Venetian legacy overlaid by 4 centuries of Ottoman administration. The walls the Venetians had built to defend the city were still standing, imposing. The harbor still retained the shape the Venetians had given it, but the inner streets were labyrinthine, blending medieval architecture with Ottoman additions. A traveler leaving Heraklion toward the interior would encounter a landscape of vast olive groves, vineyards on the hillsides, and mountains that looked like a natural fortress. And they would meet Cretans who, unlike the mainland Greeks, had the reputation, well documented by visitors of the time, of almost universally carrying weapons. In Crete, a man without a rifle was the exception, not the rule. The region of Sfakia, in the mountainous southwest of the island, had maintained an almost complete de facto autonomy for centuries. The people of Sfakia paid tribute to the Ottomans, but governed themselves. They had defeated invasion attempts. And when European travelers dared to reach it, a difficult journey along mountain trails that required local guides and tough mules, they found a population that looked at foreigners with a mix of curiosity and fierce pride. Robert Pashley, a British traveler who toured Crete in 1834, shortly after Greek independence on the mainland, must left one of the most vivid accounts. The Sfakiots were, according to him, men with an air as proud as any European aristocrat, yet living in a world of severe material poverty and extraordinary cultural richness. Beyond politics and archaeology, what made early 19th century Greece so fascinating to European travelers was the texture of everyday life. The markets, the flavors, the sounds, the social rituals of a world that existed nowhere else in Europe. The bazaars of Ottoman Greek cities were intense sensory universes. In Athens, the market spread around the Acropolis and the Roman Agora, with merchants selling spices from the east, silk fabrics imported from Constantinople, olives in wooden barrels, goat cheese cured in salt, dark honey from Hymettus, the mountain east of the city, famous for its honey since antiquity. The merchants spoke Greek, Turkish, Armenian, and Italian in a mixture that the European traveler needed weeks just to begin to understand. The food that reached travelers' tables was genuinely different from what was eaten in Western Europe. Olive oil was present in everything. The bread was dense and baked in communal ovens that functioned as social centers for villages. Wine, and especially the resinated wines the Greeks called retsina, with a pine-like flavor that baffled foreign palates, was produced locally and consumed diluted with water. Roast lamb on a spit was a celebratory dish. In everyday life, Fava beans, lentils, and seasonal vegetables dominated the diet. Coffee, Turkish coffee, served in small unfiltered cups, thick and sweet, was the center of male social life in the cafes the Ottomans had spread throughout Greece. And the Caphenion functioned as a club, a public square, and an information hub all at once. News circulated there, deals were made, and politics was debated in low voices, carefully. European travelers were fascinated by the rituals of hospitality. A foreigner arriving at any house was immediately welcomed with the household's products, olives, cheese, bread, wine. Refusing that hospitality was considered a serious insult, and after the meal, conversation could stretch for hours, with the host eager for any information about the world beyond the borders of his village. There is something unsettling and fascinating in the accounts of travelers who crossed Greece in the years immediately preceding 1821, the year the Revolution for Independence erupted. Reading these accounts today, with the benefit of historical knowledge, it is possible to feel on every page the tension that was building up, like pressure beneath a rock. The more perceptive travelers noticed signs. Lord Byron, who arrived in Greece in 1809 and was deeply impressed by what he saw, wrote about a people who had preserved their cultural identity through centuries of domination and who were clearly ready for something. The problem was that most Greeks were clear about what they didn't want, but were still formulating what they did want. The Philiki Iteria, the Society of Friends, the secret organization that would plan the revolution, was founded in 1814 in Odessa by Greek merchants from the diaspora who had grown wealthy along Black Sea trade routes and had absorbed the Enlightenment ideas of the French Revolution and the Napoleonic Wars. Their agents circulated through Greece recruiting members in the following years, and European travelers of the time would sometimes encounter these men. Well-dressed merchants, priests with calculating eyes, ship captains with a military posture, without knowing exactly what they represented. As the second decade of the 19th century turned into the third, travelers arriving in Greece found something different from the reports of previous decades. A palpable tension in the interactions between Greeks and Ottoman administrators. A watchfulness in the eyes of men in taverns. A greater frequency of questions about Europe, about how France had overthrown a king, about how the Americans had broken away from the British, about what it took for a people to become free. In March 1821, the revolution began. And those who had traveled through Greece in the preceding years immediately recognized what was happening, because they had seen, without being able to name it, the energy that had produced that moment. Early 19th century Greece was a country that did not yet exist as a country. It was a territory, a people, a memory, and a promise, dominated by an empire that collected tribute but could not erase the identity of those who paid it, inhabited by men and women who lived among the ruins of a greatness the entire world admired, and a daily reality of poverty, resistance, and stubborn dignity. The travelers who went there, Dodwell, Byron, Pashley, and dozens of others less famous, were drawn by the ancient marbles but discovered something they did not expect: a living people, not just an archaeological past. A people who knew exactly who they had been and were determined to become so again. 20 years into the century, the revolution exploded, and the world these travelers had recorded in their notebooks and sketches, the Ottoman bazaars, the kleps in the mountains, the cafes where politics was whispered, the churches that were at once houses of prayer and centers of cultural resistance, that world was transformed forever. If this video took you back in time the way we wanted, leave a like, share it with someone who loves history and travel, and click on the next video that appears on the screen. It was picked especially for those who made it this far.